So we're going to continue to talk about infinitives today. And if you remember, they're similar to participles in the fact that they're both verbs. Infinitives can behave as nouns just like participles can behave as adjectives. The only infinitive case that you haven't learned already is future active and future passive. On page 20 in your chart book, you'll be able to see those, how to form them. You actually already know how to form the future active. Passive is really rare, so you don't have to remember that. Active is the future active participle form you've already learned. Remember, it has a UR in before the ending plus SA. It's translated to be about to verb or to be going to verb. All right, brief review about infinitives. Infinitives are never conjugated, unlike participles, which is nice. Infinitives often act as nouns. Infinitives can be the subject or object of a verb. Remember, objects are direct objects, indirect objects, it's the accusative. And the simplest English translation of an infinitive begins with the word to. You learn those at the very beginning of your Latin life: to run, to walk, to sleep, to kill, anything like that. That's the simplest infinitive. Here's the new thing. Infinitives are always neuter in gender when not in an indirect statement. Here's what we're going to talk about today is indirect statements. Indirect statements are very common in Latin, and they always use infinitives. Just so you know, they don't use infinitives in English, but they do in Latin. And an indirect statement is simply a statement relayed indirectly. Let me give you an example. Direct statement is, she said. Can you see the quotes there too? That's what makes it a direct statement. The dragon was about to nibble on your ear. An indirect statement would be, she told me the dragon was about to nibble on my ear. Let's look in Latin. An example in Latin would be ubio pueros pugnare. I order the boys to fight. You see, it's got an infinitive in there. And an indirect statement also has an infinitive, though it doesn't get translated with a to fight. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So the only thing that changed, if you notice, this one has ubio and this one has dico. Indirect statements always use the infinitive form, but the main verb here changes. So all indirect statements have a main verb, and this is the main verb, dico, that introduces the rest of the sentence. It's called a head verb because the action originates in your head. Okay? And they are speaking, knowing, thinking, perceiving, and feeling verbs. So here we have speaking verbs. These are all the examples of speaking verbs: knowing, perceiving, and feeling, and thinking. These are in your chart books. If you look on page 23 and 24, all the stuff that we're talking about today will be in there, and that will help you. Okay, so back to dico pueros pugnare. Let's take a closer look at that. So a head verb, remember that's actually right here, dico to say. It's a speaking verb. A head verb, so we have a head verb. It introduces the indirect statement, and the head verb is dico. The subject of the indirect statement, do you remember the rule, is always in the accusative case. Pueros is the subject of the indirect statements, but it's in the accusative case. All right. The main verb of the indirect statement will be an infinitive. So here we have the infinitive. All right. Now, the infinitive is never conjugated, although it will match in gender case and number to the accusative if it is a perfect passive or future active infinitive. It's not here. We'll do one of those later. So let's do the steps to translate. Okay? Dico pueros pugnare. We have to identify the tense and voice of the head verb. A head verb is right here. Remember, it originates in your head, and we know that it's present tense. Determine when the action is occurring in relation to the head verb. This is also in your chart book. That will help you. I'll put them all down right now. If it's a present infinitive, the action is going on at the same time as the head verb. If it's a perfect infinitive, the action is completed before the time of the head verb. And the future infinitive, the action occurs after the time of the head verb. In this sentence, the infinitive is in the present tense, which means the action is going on at the same time as the head verb. Okay? All right. So English usually uses a that to introduce the indirect statement. In an indirect statement, the infinitive doesn't begin with a to. In fact, it clearly wouldn't make sense. And we'll talk more about translating in a moment. So let's talk about dico, pueros, pugnare. Okay, let's go back and take a look at that. So dico, I say, let's do introduce with a that. Who? This is the subject, even though it's in the accusative case. The boys, because who's the victim of being said? The boys are. So that's why it makes it the accusative, but it's really the subject of the indirect part of the statement. Pueros pugnare. It's basically called an accusative subject. Notice I didn't say accusative nominative. It's an accusative subject. I say that the boys, now it's present infinitive, so the action has to be going on at the same time as the head verb. We have to say, I say that the boys are fighting. It makes it happening at the same time. Right? Happening at the same time. We'll practice all of this translation and more in just a minute in the next video.